They told me the forest was sacred, that if I listened closely, I could hear it breathe. I thought they were eccentric at best, but now, deep in the ancient pines, I've seen the forest open its mouth. I've heard the trees scream. I've learned the rules by blood, and I've broken one. If you're reading this, it's probably too late. But maybe, just maybe, you'll follow the rules better than I did. I never planned to join a cult. Let me rephrase that. I didn't even believe in cults. Not the robe-wearing, rule-bound, chant-muttering kind. But here I am, a self-declared man of logic and faith, writing this by lantern light in a cabin that creaks with every breath of wind. They call me Father Elias now, and the trees outside my window are whispering again. It all started 3 months ago, in late August. My church in Willow Creek had burned down under mysterious circumstances. Electrical fault, they said, but I had my doubts. Something had been off in that town for months. Parishioners acting strangely. Strange symbols drawn in the dust on pews. Odd laughter echoing during late-night confessions. When the church collapsed into cinders, so did the last thread of normalcy I was clinging to. Then came the letter. It arrived in an envelope sealed with wax. No return address. Inside was a short message written in black ink. The forest welcomes you. Come north. We have a place for you. We need a priest. Beneath it was a hand-drawn map. No road names. Just a route carved through thick forest. The only marker was a name I'd never heard. Ashvale Grove. Every instinct screamed to toss it in the fire. But after the loss of the church and my subsequent resignation, I had nothing anchoring me. No flock, no home. So I followed the map. I drove upstate, past towns that looked like they'd stopped evolving in the 50s, into areas where the GPS blinked out and cell reception vanished. It felt like slipping into a different time. The paved roads gave way to gravel, then to dirt. Eventually, the forest swallowed everything. Towering redwoods, ancient and unervingly still, lined the path like silent sentinels. I arrived just before dusk. Ashvale Grove wasn't on any map, and for good reason. It wasn't a town so much as a cluster of cabins deep within the forest. Maybe 10 structures total. Everything built from the same moss-covered wood. There were no power lines, no satellite dishes, just people waiting. They stood in a circle as I stepped out of my car. Men and women, barefoot, draped in beige robes tied with black cords. Their faces were painted with streaks of ash. At the center stood an older man with eyes the color of rotting leaves. "Welcome, Father Elias," he said, already knowing my name. "We are the fold of ash. You've been chosen." I wanted to turn and leave. Every rational part of me rebelled. But something deeper, a primal current, held me fast. I nodded and followed them. That night, they led me to the chapel. It wasn't a chapel in any Christian sense. No cross, no altar, just a clearing lit by hanging lanterns, with a ring of flat stones carved with symbols I didn't recognize. The scent of cedar and burnt resin clung to everything. The elder, whose name I learned was Gray, gave me my robe and a book bound in bark. "Here," he said, handing it to me reverently, "are the rules." There were only 7 of them. Simple but strange. Rule number 1, never enter the forest after sundown, unless summoned. Rule number 2, never cut or burn the trees. Rule number 3, speak only truths within the circle. Rule number 4, on the 13th night, offer a piece of yourself. Rule number 5, do not look at the hollow man. Rule number 6, when the drums sound, do not hide. Rule number 7, never question the offering. I asked what the offering meant, but Gray only smiled. You'll understand when the time comes. The days that followed were oddly peaceful. I was given a small cabin near the creek. Each morning, I joined the fold in ritual cleansings and silent meditations. We ate only what the forest provided: berries, roots, small game. And every night, we sang. The chants were ancient, sung in a language no one could name. I didn't recognize it, but it stirred something dormant, like some primal memory buried deep beneath bone. They treated me like a leader, but I didn't lead anything. I merely recited words from the book, held my hands aloft during their ceremonies, and watched. That changed on the 13th night. The fire blazed brighter than usual. The air was thick with pine smoke and incense. One by one, the members of the fold came forward and placed offerings into the fire: a lock of hair, a drop of blood, a tooth. When it was my turn, I hesitated. What do I offer? I whispered. Gray stepped forward and placed a knife in my hand. A piece of yourself, he said softly. My instinct was to cut my palm, but then I remembered the rule: never question the offering. So I raised the blade and pressed it against the top of my left ear. Just a sliver, a thin strip of flesh. The pain was blinding, but the fire welcomed it. The flames surged, and then the forest stirred. I heard it, all of us did. A low groan rising from the trees. Not wind, not animals. A voice, deep, ancient, and hungry. I fell to my knees. The ritual ended in silence. No one spoke of what we'd heard. But the next morning, one of the cabins was empty. A woman named Myra was simply gone. No farewell, no belongings, just vanished. When I asked Gray, he answered only, she was chosen. That week, the rules began to make more sense. I watched a man named Silas reach out to snap a twig from one of the redwoods. Before he touched it, a thick swarm of beetles erupted from the bark and consumed his hand. They chewed through muscle and bone before we could help. All that was left was a blackened stump and a mouth that couldn't stop screaming. He broke rule 2. Another night, I ventured too close to the circle and murmured a half-truth during a ritual, pretending I had faith when I didn't. The air thickened. My mouth locked open mid-chant. I couldn't speak or close it for hours. Only when I confessed my lie to the group did the paralysis lift. I broke rule 3. I began to understand that these weren't symbolic guidelines. They were laws, cosmic, inviolable, enforced by something watching us, something in the woods. Then came the drums. I woke to the sound of them, slow, hollow thuds, echoing between the trees. Everyone rushed outside, robes already donned. Gray's face was tight. Do not hide, he warned. It's Rule 6. The entire village gathered in the clearing. We stood, silent, as the drumming grew louder, closer. It didn't come from a speaker or instrument. It came from the trees themselves, trunks reverberating like skin-stretched drums. And then we saw him, tall, unnaturally thin, draped in tattered moss. No face, just a blank space where features should be. He stepped between trees like smoke, limbs bending the wrong way. Everyone dropped to their knees. Everyone except me. I was frozen, mesmerized. The Hollow Man. He passed within inches of me. I could smell the rot and earth and time dripping off him. His head turned, slowly, toward me. I looked. His face didn't exist, but my mind filled it in. I saw every sin I'd ever committed, every shame, every doubt, all staring back at me in a whirlwind of shape and light and agony. And then he vanished. Gray found me an hour later, curled beneath the roots of a tree, muttering apologies to no one. You looked, he said. I had broken Rule 5. I asked what happened to me. He only said, not yet. Now I write this, 3 days after seeing the Hollow Man. The drums have returned each night. I don't sleep anymore. The trees speak in riddles. Faces appear in the bark when I blink too long. And tonight is the offering. I don't know what they'll ask of me, but I know I cannot question it. Because the final rule, the most important of them all, waits to be tested. And I'm already running out of time. They came for me before dawn. Two robed figures stood outside my cabin as the mist thickened around the grove. One held a lantern that cast shadows in every direction but forward. The other carried a knife, not raised in threat, but held like an offering. Without a word, they beckoned. I knew what it meant. Tonight was the offering, and I was the offering. I didn't resist. The forest doesn't reward resistance, it punishes it. I'd seen what happened to Silas. I'd seen the Hollow Man. I was done testing boundaries. They led me deep into the woods, far beyond the circle of cabins and rituals, past the stone runes and bone fetishes strung between trees. Each step forward made the air heavier, like the forest was inhaling me. Eventually, we arrived at a clearing I hadn't seen before. The earth was scorched, as if lightning had struck repeatedly. Charred stumps protruded like blackened teeth. At the center was a smooth stone slab, slick with dew or something thicker. Around it, the ground pulsed with life, roots rising and falling beneath the soil like something breathing. Gray stood beside the slab, waiting. "You've done well, Elias," he said, his voice low, reverent. "The forest watches. It listens. And now it demands." The robed figures held my arms. Gray gestured to the stone. "Lie down." I did. Not because I wanted to. Not because I believed in any of this. But because some instinct older than reason told me that refusal would be worse than death. I laid my back against the cold stone. The knife glinted in Gray's hand. "What are you taking?" I asked, my voice barely more than breath. He didn't answer. Instead, he began to chant. Words from the bark-bound book, but altered. Darker, more guttural. The ground trembled. The trees leaned in. The roots beneath me coiled like snakes. The knife touched my chest, and then it didn't, because the blade stopped midair and twisted in Gray's hand. He gasped, stumbling back, clutching at the hilt as if it burned him. The knife clattered to the ground. The air changed. The forest went silent, and then it spoke, not with words, not with voices, but I knew. Deep in my bones, I knew. Not yet. The words weren't for Gray. They were for me. Gray fell to his knees, trembling. The robed figures dropped their lantern and fled. I sat up, chest heaving, blood pounding in my ears. "You were spared," Gray whispered, not to me, but to the trees. And I should have felt grateful, but I didn't, because as I looked around that circle of scorched trees, I saw something I shouldn't have. Beneath the soil, half buried in black roots, was a human face. Eyes closed, mouth slightly open in an eternal scream. Dozens of them, dozens of faces, all preserved, all silent. They weren't decomposing, they were waiting. After the failed offering, things changed. The fold didn't speak to me directly anymore. They still bowed when I passed, still brought food to my cabin, still followed my lead during rituals. But they never looked me in the eye. I had become something else, not above them, not below, other. Gray avoided me altogether. When I tried to question him, he simply muttered, "The forest spared you. That doesn't mean it favors you." I found myself wandering more, drawn to parts of the woods I hadn't dared explore before. Something in the trees pulled at me, not physically, but emotionally, like they knew something I didn't and wanted me to discover it on my own. One morning, I followed a trail I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't marked. It wasn't natural. The branches had twisted to form a crude arch, and beneath it, the grass grew black and brittle. I stepped through. The temperature dropped instantly. Frost clung to the bark despite the summer air. I walked for what felt like hours until I came to a place where the trees opened into a hollow pit. A massive root system spiraled down like a natural amphitheater. and at its center stood a wooden figure, twice the size of a man, carved from dark, slick wood. It had no face, no arms, only a hollow chest cavity filled with bones, animal, human, and something in between. Carved beneath its feet was a message in that ancient language. But this time I understood it. To break the rules is to feed the hollow. To follow the rules is to become him. A twig snapped behind me. I spun. No one was there, but the shadows moved. Something was watching. I ran, blindly, branches whipping my face, the taste of rot filling my mouth. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of the grove. When I returned, the other priests avoided me even more than before. That night, Rule 7 came for me. I was reading by lantern light when the drums returned, soft at first, like distant thunder, but then louder, closer. I stepped outside. No one else was reacting. No gathering in the clearing. No chants. The cabins were dark. Windows shuttered. And then I saw him, at the edge of the trees. The Hollow Man. His limbs twitched in slow, jerking motions, like a puppet struggling against invisible strings. He didn't move forward, just watched. I remember Rule 5. Do not look at the Hollow Man. I turned away, covered my eyes, but my body didn't move. Something inside me wanted to stare, needed to, and then he spoke. A voice like rusted metal and wet leaves, grinding through air and bone. They have lied. I opened my eyes. He was gone, but something was left behind, half buried in the dirt outside my cabin. A jawbone, human, still wet, wrapped around it, a strip of parchment. I unrolled it. 7 new rules. But these weren't written in ink. They were carved, scratched with something sharp. Rule number 1. The forest is not sacred. It is a prison. Rule number 2. The fold does not worship. They feed. Rule number 3. The Hollow Man was the first priest. Rule number 4. Each offering strengthens the chains. Rule number 5. The forest is waking. Rule number 6. You were not spared. You were chosen. Rule number 7. Break the circle. Set it free. I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the trees whisper. What was the truth? Had I been lied to since day 1? Or was this some trick by whatever the Hollow Man had become? I had to know. So at sunrise, I went to the chapel clearing, the stone circle, the place of rituals. I stood in the center and stared at the carvings. All this time, I thought it was for worship, for sacrifice. But now I look closer. The stones weren't symbols of protection. They were locks, each one etched with binding sigils, meant to trap something beneath the soil. The rituals didn't summon power. They suppressed it. The offerings weren't gifts. They were payments, tributes, prison taxes. And with every drop of blood, every sliver of flesh, we weren't feeding a god. We were feeding the lock, ensuring it stayed shut. And now, the lock was weakening. I confronted Gray. I found him meditating near the creek, drawing symbols in the mud with his fingertips. You knew, I said, voice shaking. You knew this wasn't worship. He looked up slowly, tired eyes sunken deep into his skull. I did, he admitted, and so did my predecessor, and his before him. We do not worship the forest, Elias. We guard it. We keep it sleeping, by feeding it people, by feeding it what it demands. He stood. It must never wake. That is the only rule that matters. I showed him the jawbone, the message, the alternate rules. His eyes widened just slightly. That's not possible. It was left by the Hollow Man. He stepped back, fear breaking through his stoic mask for the first time. He speaks to you. Yes, you're already changing. His voice cracked. You're becoming him. That night, I couldn't stop shaking. I looked at the rules again, both sets. One meant to preserve, one meant to break. What was the truth? The Hollow Man had once been a priest. That much was clear. He had served like me, and something had broken him, or freed him. What if Rule 7, the one I'd been warned never to question, was the biggest lie of all? Never question the offering. Because if you did, you'd realize what you were offering. Yourself. Not to a god, but to a cage. And now the cage was rusting, cracking, and I was the key. The dreams started that night. They weren't like nightmares. They didn't wake me in a sweat or make me scream. They lulled me, hypnotic and slow, like drowning in honey. I was standing at the center of the stone circle. The trees bowed inward, their bark bleeding sap that steamed in the cold air. Dozens of faces surrounded me, eyes missing, mouths sewn shut. They were the fold, but not as I knew them. And across from me stood the Hollow Man. He didn't speak, not with words. His body shook with unnatural spasms, twitching like something trapped in flesh it no longer recognized. But his thoughts poured into mine, heavy and oily. Do you see it now? I tried to speak, but my mouth wouldn't open. My tongue had been carved out. They bind me. They bind you. You were their skin. He stepped forward. His fingers, long and splintered, pointed to my chest, where the skin split like paper. Beneath the bark, I awoke gasping, fingers clawing at my own flesh. There was no bark, just skin, just sweat. But the scent of the forest lingered, stronger than it ever had inside my cabin. And someone was knocking on the door. It was a girl. Couldn't have been more than 12. Her eyes were gray and wide, and her robe was stained with something dark along the hem. She didn't speak, just handed me a folded scrap of leather and turned away. I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a tooth, long curved, not human, and a note. We found her. She remembers. Silas. Silas. The outcast. The heretic. The one who had been dragged into the woods for breaking Rule 4. He was alive. I shouldn't have followed the girl. I should have gone to Gray. I should have burned the note. But I didn't. I waited until sundown, then slipped into the woods, following the narrow trail she'd vanished into. The path was older than the others, wound between trees like veins, lined with moss-covered stones and hollowed logs. It felt wrong in a different way than the rest of the forest. Not hostile, not cursed, forgotten. And eventually, I found him. Silas sat beside a collapsed totem, his face gaunt, his robe torn. He had aged 20 years in the span of a few weeks. His skin was papery, and his eyes flicked toward the trees constantly, as if expecting them to move. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, without looking up. "I got your message." He smiled faintly. "No, you got hers." I frowned. "The girl. She's not real. She's a memory. Of her. Of what came before the fold. Before the worship. Before the rules." He looked me in the eye, and I saw it then. The same flicker I'd seen in the Hollow Man, something raw and ancient just beneath the surface. "I've seen her too," I whispered. He nodded. "Then you know what we're guarding. What's buried beneath the roots? Tell me." He laughed, short and bitter. "You think we're the first. The fold's been through hundreds of cycles. Every few generations, someone learns the truth. They try to stop it. They always fail. The rules don't protect us. They contain her." Silas pointed to the ground. "She's still here. And every offering, every chant, every drop of blood keeps her just asleep enough." I looked around. What happens if she wakes? Silas didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his satchel and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. He handed it to me with shaking hands. I unwrapped it. It was a mask, wooden, painted red, hollow-eyed. The same mask the Hollow Man wore. "I found it beneath the chapel stones," Silas whispered. "He wasn't the first, and neither are you." I ran. Through the forest, through the night, clutching the mask tight to my chest. The wind howled, but there was no storm. The trees shifted, but there was no breeze. And somewhere behind me, something followed. Not Silas. Something else. When I reached my cabin, I bolted the door and collapsed, heart hammering, the mask still in my grip. But my floor was covered in dirt. Not scattered, arranged. Words, written in forest soil. Beneath the chapel. Find the bones. I waited until dawn. Then I went to the chapel. No one stopped me. No one even noticed. The fold were gathered in the clearing, murmuring prayers. Gray was nowhere in sight. The chapel had always been a crude structure, a wooden dome held together by roots and sap. But I knew now it wasn't built for prayer. It was built to hide. I pried the altar loose. Beneath it, stone steps spiraled into the earth. Unlit, wet, breathing. With a lantern in one hand and the mask in the other, I descended. The air was colder than ice, but damp with heat. My skin prickled. My breath fogged. And at the bottom, I found the chamber. A wide cavern, walls covered in carvings, so ancient they'd begun to crumble. Bones lined the floor, thousands of them, arranged in spirals. Ribs interlocked like chains. Skulls stacked to the ceiling. And at the center, a skeleton bound in black root, arms outstretched, chest pierced by a wooden spike. The first priest, still wearing the same mask I held in my hand. But his was cracked, split through the center. I knelt beside him. The carvings on the wall were older than the fold's language, but I understood them. Somehow I knew. They told the story of a spirit, not a god, not a demon, but something deeper, primordial, born when the first trees split open beneath lightning. She had no name, but many titles. The hungering root, the flesh beneath bark, the forest's heart. She had been bound here centuries ago by the first priest who sacrificed his own life to become the lock. Every priest after him was just a delay, a stalling ritual, but the lock was weakening. And I was chosen not to maintain it, to replace it. I returned to the surface to find the fold gathered in silence. Gray was at the center, his hands bloodied, eyes wide. They know, he whispered as I approached. They all know. I looked past him. The clearing had changed. The trees were split open, sap spilling out like pus. The soil pulsed with veins. And from beneath the chapel, I could hear the sound of wood cracking. Did you read it? Gray asked. The carvings. I nodded. Then you understand. I understand more than you ever did, I said. And I placed the mask on my face. The moment it touched skin, I felt her. Not in my mind, not in my thoughts, in my blood. She moved through me like roots, searched my memories like fingers through mud. She whispered of hunger and eternity and rebirth, and she offered me a choice. Let me out, she said, and I will make you whole. Bind me again, and you will suffer forever. She wasn't evil. She wasn't good. She simply was. And the fold had feared her because they didn't understand. But I did. She was the forest itself. The rot, the growth, the decay, the cycle. And she was done being contained. Gray lunged at me with the ritual knife. The fold screamed, and I let the mask decide. My hand moved without thought. The knife twisted in the air and buried itself in Gray's throat. He dropped, gurgling. The fold fell to their knees. Some wept. Others began to chant. And me? I walked to the edge of the clearing, where the roots had begun to rise. I touched one, and it shuddered. You are the new lock, she whispered. But I shook my head. No. I raised the jawbone, the one she'd given me, and I snapped it in half. The ground erupted. Roots tore through soil. Trees split. Screams echoed from every direction. The sky darkened, not with clouds, but with leaves flying upward like they were fleeing. The chapel cracked in two. The bones below were drawn upward into the air, spinning like a storm of marrow and dust. And at the center of it all, the hollow man appeared. Not twisted, not broken, but whole. He walked toward me and removed his mask. His face was mine, but older, tired, eyes like ash. I tried to stop it too, he said, but I was too weak. What happens now? I asked. He looked to the rising trees. She will be free. For a time. For how long? He smiled. Until someone else puts on the mask. And then he crumbled into bark. The folds scattered. Some were devoured by roots. Others vanished into trees. A few stood in silence, waiting for their fate. I turned my back on them all. I walked into the heart of the woods, where the soil still steamed and the light never reached. The rules were gone now, all but one. Don't forget who you are, because if I did, she would take over completely, and the forest would never let me leave. I didn't sleep for 3 days. Sleep would have meant surrender, and I was afraid that if I closed my eyes, she'd creep in through the cracks of my mind, wrap herself around my spine, and hollow me out like she had with the others. The hollow man gray, even Silas, each of them had worn a mask, and each of them had lost themselves to her. But I wasn't like them. I wasn't born in the fold. I hadn't grown up believing the trees whispered salvation. I came from the world outside, and now that world was bleeding in. The forest wasn't the same anymore. The animals had gone silent. The air was thick with mold. The trees leaned inward, watching, listening. The sky was a greenish-gray smear, as if the clouds had been painted on wet bark. The clearing where the chapel once stood was now a pit, roots spiraling downward like a drain, the bones of the first priest still spinning slowly in the air above it. And at the center of it all, I stood, wearing the mask. Not always, just when I needed to see, because the mask didn't show the world as it was. It showed it as she saw it. The first time I put it back on after the uprising, I saw the fold again. They hadn't died. They hadn't fled. They'd become part of her. Gray was fused to a tree trunk, mouth still moving in silent prayer. His hand had stretched in a bark. His spine snapped backward, face eternally tilted toward the canopy. The children were worse. They danced in the mist, limbs boneless, eyes white, mouths stitched with vines. They laughed soundlessly. They played games without rules. And they saw me. Every time I put on the mask, they would gather at the edge of vision, waiting for something, waiting for me. Silas came back, not in the way I hoped. I heard his voice in the roots, muffled, wet. I followed it deep into the heartwoods, through a grove where all the trees had teeth. I found his body spread across a dozen trunks, skin peeled into pages, carved with warnings. His eyes blinked from separate branches. His ribcage had become a bird's nest, filled with twitching, featherless things. But he spoke. "You're not the lock," he rasped. "You're the key." "What does that mean?" "You open the gate. Now it can't be closed." I tried to run. I made it 3 miles east, back toward the trail I came in on, before the fog turned me around. Every tree I passed whispered doubts. Every stone was a memory I didn't recognize. I saw my childhood home rotting in the distance. My mother's voice called to me from a hollow stump. When I passed the same moss-covered boulder for the 5th time, I realized I was no longer walking through a forest. I was walking through her. I returned to the clearing, starved and shaking, and found the altar reassembled. It hadn't been built by hands. It had grown back, twisted branches, coiled roots, a pulsing slab of stone that breathed like an animal. And at the base of it, a book I hadn't seen before, bound in bark, inked in sap, no title. I opened it. Inside were pages of names, hundreds, thousands, each marked with a symbol, a birth, a death, a ritual, a binding, and then, finally my own, written in black. Jonathan Hale. Key. Unlocked. Catalyst. Do not allow to leave. I should have burned it. Instead, I read on. The pages shifted as I turned them, revealing rituals, summonings, histories of ancient priests who'd carved language from root and bone, drawings of creatures, limbless, faceless, devouring stars. And then, a passage in blood-red script. When the key forgets it is a key, the gate becomes the world. I stared at that line for hours. The implication chilled me. If I lost my identity, my memory, then she would not be confined to this forest. She would spread through root and rain and rot. She would be everywhere. On the fifth day, I met the last of the fold. She came from the North Ridge, her face tattooed with broken circles, her left arm missing, replaced by a twisted knot of wood. She called herself Marrow, and she wasn't afraid of me. "You're still holding on," she said, circling me slowly, still trying to remember what came before. But she eats memory, priest. She gnaws at it until all you know is her voice. "I'm not like the others." "No," she agreed. "You're worse." I tensed. "She chose you. You let her in. The others resisted. You invited her." "She tricked me." Meryl laughed. "She didn't need to. You were already breaking before you found us." She offered to show me something. I followed her to a hollow tree, a tower of bark split open like a wound. Inside was a spiral staircase of bone. We descended. At the bottom, a mirror. Not glass. Water. Black. Still. "She can't touch you here," Marrow said. "Not yet." I looked into the reflection, and I saw myself, but as I was becoming. Skin sloughing, veins like vines, eyes wide and wooden, and behind me, the forest, stretching forever. Then, I blinked, and the reflection didn't. It smiled, and raised the mask. I staggered back. "She's already inside," I whispered. Marrow nodded. "Pieces. Fragments. Like seeds." "Can I stop it?" "Yes." "Ow." She handed me a dagger, carved from root, wet with sap, humming with hunger. "She can't live in what's broken," Marrow said. "If you shatter the vessel before she finishes blooming, she'll sleep again." "You want me to kill myself?" "No, I want you to choose. Before she chooses for you." That night, I dreamed of the city, not the one I came from, one from before cities had names. Stone pyramids choked by vines, temples carved with faces no longer worshipped, rivers filled with bones. And in the sky, she floated, vast, rooted into the stars, feeding on light. At her center me, wearing the mask, smiling. I awoke with the dagger in hand, and the altar humming louder than ever. I approached it, slowly, barefoot, breath fogging in the warm air. The mask was still on my face. I removed it. Everything dimmed. Colors dulled. The air grew thick. But I could think again. For a moment, I wasn't a priest. I was just Jonathan, a man lost in the woods. Then the altar opened. It didn't crack or splinter. It bloomed, like a flower made of bone. And inside, a heart. Not flesh. Not wood. Something between. Pulsing. Beating. Breathing my name. "Jonathan. Jonathan. Jonathan." I raised the dagger, and something moved behind me. "Marrow." "No," she whispered. "Not yet. There's one more thing you need to see." She reached in her chest, literally into it, and pulled out a scroll sealed with sap. I took it with trembling hands, unfurled it. Inside, a map of the world. But wrong. The oceans were cracked like eggshells. The continents reshaped into roots. The cities were knots. The roads were veins. And at the center of it all, this forest. I looked up. "What is this?" She met my eyes. "This is what she'll turn the world into if you fail." I made my choice. I left the altar, left the heart, left the dagger, and returned to the pit, where the chapel had collapsed, where the bones still spun, where the hollow man had vanished. And there, I began the ritual again. The one I'd read in the book. The one the first priest used. But instead of binding her, I spoke to her. "You don't have to take everything," I whispered. She replied in wind and leaves and the sigh of moss. "Everything is all I've ever known. I'll give you something. A piece of me. A tether." She hesitated. "Then what piece?" And I said, "My name." It hurt. More than any pain I'd known. Like every memory was being pulled from bone marrow. But when it was over, I couldn't remember my parents, my childhood, my favorite food, my first kiss, my real name. Only the forest. Only her. But in return, she slept. Not fully, but enough. The trees calmed. The roots slowed. The altar closed. And marrow vanished. Now I sit at the edge of the clearing. The new hollow man. The new tether. Not a priest. Not anymore. Just a vessel that remembers nothing but the forest. Because someone must always remember. Even if it's not their memory anymore. I no longer know the year. The concept of time has frayed like rotting bark. Days blur with nights. Seasons tangle and die like snakes eating their tails. I live in the forest now. Not just within it, but as it. I breathe with the wind. I bleed with the trees. And still I wait. Because the sleep I bargained for, the slumber I bought with my own name, is ending. She is waking up. It began subtly. Birds nesting upside down. Rain falling upward into the clouds. Fungi growing in the shape of screaming mouths. Then came the dreams again. But they weren't mine. They were fragments, stolen bits of lives I'd never lived. A girl crushed under a burning cathedral. A boy swallowed by a shadow. A king impaled on an obsidian throne made of his own teeth. Each time I woke, I found a new scar on my body. Symbols I couldn't read, carved in spirals. The forest was writing its story on me, and I was running out of room. I returned to the altar. The heart was gone. In its place, a mask. Not the one I wore before. This one was alive. Flesh woven with bark. Eyes made of pitch. It pulsed when I got near. I didn't touch it, but it saw me and whispered, "You promised." The rules, I realized, had changed again. The old commandments etched in a stone no longer applied. Now there were new laws, pulsing through the forest like blood. 1. Do not say your name aloud. It no longer belongs to you. 2. Never follow the deer with human eyes. 3. If the trees bleed, do not offer comfort. Apologize and leave. 4. If you hear the bells, bury your ears. 5. You're not a priest. You are the wound. I carved them into my hut's walls. Memorized them, because forgetting, even once, would be fatal. Then came the visitor. He appeared at dawn, dragging a suitcase behind him, wearing a bright yellow raincoat despite the sun. His name was Dr. Isherwood. "I'm with the university," he said. "Folklore and psychogeographic ritual studies. I found your writings. Pages mailed anonymously. Diaries, maps, symbols. I didn't send anything. Well, someone did. Hundreds of pages. I didn't speak. I was staring at the roots near his feet. They were curling slowly toward him. "You need to leave," I said. "Now." But he smiled. "I came to see if the stories were true." That night, I found him kneeling before the altar, eyes wide, crying softly. He had touched the living mask, and it had shown him everything. "They weren't hallucinations," he whispered. "They were blueprints. This forest, it's not sick. It's becoming, preparing for something. She's waking," I said. I made a pact to slow her, but it's unraveling. He looked at me with awe. "You're the vessel." "No, I'm the plug in a dam made of bones." And the trees groaned, and from every direction, the bells began to ring. I screamed and tackled him, slamming my hands over his ears. But it was too late. The roots pierced the soil around us like javelins. The ground cracked. A terrible chorus rose, a song made of voices never meant to harmonize. I saw her shadow rising behind the trees, and I knew the gate was opening. Again, he began muttering something over and over. When the key forgets it is a key, the gate becomes the world. When the key forgets it is a key. And that's when I understood. It wasn't about sealing her. It was about remembering what I was. Not a priest, not a guardian, not a prisoner, but a key, a tool with only one purpose: unlock or lock her. And if I'd forgotten that, if I'd fully become a vessel, then her roots could slither into everything, including you. We fled, Isherwood and I, down the bone spiral staircase beneath the hollow tree, the one where Marrow had once shown me the mirror of the self. But the pool was no longer water. It was a mouth, wide, gnashing, waiting. I turned back, only to find Isherwood already kneeling at its edge, eyes rolled back. "She's not evil," he whispered. "She's hunger. You can't moralize that." Then he leaned forward, and the pool swallowed him whole. I should have run. Instead, I leaned in and whispered my name into the darkness. Not the one I traded, the one buried beneath it, the one my mother had given me. And for the first time in years, I remembered. It was like detonating dynamite inside my skull. The forest howled, the trees bent away, the mask screamed, and I saw the truth. She was never meant to be locked. She was meant to be understood, not with words, not with books, but with sacrifice. Not just of blood, but of memory. That was the price of binding her. Each generation of priests, each fold, each ritual, they gave parts of themselves to keep her dreaming. A finger, a face, a soul, a name. But I was the first to give her everything. And now that I'd remembered who I was, I could finish what I started. I returned to the clearing one last time, wearing the living mask, holding the scroll with the world rewritten. The altar waited. The vines had formed a throne of sorts. I sat, and the forest shuddered. All around me, the fold re-emerged, gray, smiling through barked lips. The children, stitched together with moss. Marrow, half tree, half woman, watching silently. They gathered in a circle and chanted my name. Every syllable felt like a splinter under the skin. I was becoming the story they would carry forward. The next rule, the next wound, the next root. The ground split. A tower of wood and bone rose from the pit. Inside it, the gate. Not a door, not a portal, a mirror, the one I'd seen years ago. But this time, it reflected not me, but you. And now you understand. This is not a story you're hearing. It's a seed, a ritual, passed through written word, carried by voice, rooted in thought. And by listening, by knowing, you brought her a little closer. Because the final rule was never spoken aloud. It was hidden, buried, until now. Rule number 6. If you tell someone about her, she follows the roots of your words into their world. You may not believe me. You may think this is fiction. But tonight, when you dream, you'll see the deer with human eyes. You'll hear the bells. You'll wake up with soil under your nails and a name you don't remember giving. And then you'll realize, you didn't read this. You were chosen by it.